Well, hey, everybody. My name is Brian Jensen. I'm an executive search consultant with Vanderbloemen. Vanderbloemen's a firm that specializes in helping Christian organizations, churches, nonprofits, schools, hire great leaders and help them navigate all sorts of situations. We're in a really interesting situation right now, and I'm so glad to be having a conversation with my friend, Dr. Jeff Doyle, who's the Associate Director of Planning and Assessment at Baylor University, and just really excited to have you here, Jeff. I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself. But again, thanks for making time today.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Brian. I'm really happy to be here chatting with you. So, I'm not going to do the full story, but I do think it's important to touch on our passion. And for me, it was in college. I had a rough couple years, and then my junior year, I got involved in some basically student affairs type, ministry type programs, and that really transformed my life and my perspective and my purpose. And I felt called to go into student affairs back in 1992. And been doing it ever since up until last year. It was the dean for students basically at Baylor University, and shifted over into institutional research. One of the things I've always enjoyed doing is helping universities plan and assess. My dissertation looked at what student affairs is really good at relationship work, similar to churches. They expect pastors to be very pastoral, but management of churches, the same way management of universities isn't always something that comes naturally. I learned that many folks in student affairs struggled in that area, and I found myself being somewhat helpful there. So my new role has allowed me to help more in planning and assessment.
Yeah, it's awesome. Jeff and I were geeking out a little bit as we were talking before this interview, because I have 15 years of experience in Christian higher ed, and a lot of that with retention management, student affairs work, academic support, which we're going to talk about more specifically here. But I just love talking, how do we help students stay at our institutions and thrive and flourish at our institutions? And it takes a lot of hard work. It takes people like Jeff running data points like it's his job, because it is your job to do institutional research. And then how do we use that to make the best environment for our students across the country at our institutions? So Jeff, again, thank you. Yeah. What, we're in this crazy, it's March 26th, I think. And so we are all, obviously, many of us working from home, and our realities have changed. And one of the things at Vanderbloemen we're trying to do is just walk with people through this and navigate it together as best we can. But tell me a little bit, how has your work and life changed over the last couple of weeks?
Sure. Yeah. When this first hit, I was at another university doing some consulting, and it was pretty amazing, as all of us, will think back, and where were you when 9/11 hit? Where were you when the Challenger went down? Or older folks, where were you when JFK was shot, or Martin Luther King? But for us, I don't know what the exact moment would be, but it was like sitting around a table with these peers and being like, the NBA is canceled, classes are canceled at University of Washington. And then it was just the steamroll going on. And so we were all, as many people are also asking themselves, like, how does this change what we do? I have a boss who is, I think, forward looking. And so he basically said, let's stop what we're doing. We work at institutional effectiveness. I was reviewing assessment reports, helping our compliance with our accreditation, guiding some folks in strategic planning, and we just stopped what we were doing and said, what can we do to be most helpful to Baylor? Which, last week, my boss took the lead on a data visualization project where we pulled everything we had from our learning management systems, or how professors teach using technology, and we looked to the extent that they were adopting it, how they could use help, what could we do to help them be more successful in the classes. And so we shared that. We looked at their feedback and we sent that information out to different offices so they could help them. This week, we're working on a student survey. So that's what I was working on some this morning, is sending out kind of a pulse check to our students. How are you doing? What's going on? Are you able to learn effectively where you are? And so,
Yeah.
we're focusing our efforts on what can be most helpful to the university right now.
Yeah. Are any of Baylor students on campus still, or is it completely closed down?
No, there would still be. I think, yeah, we have about 5,500 beds, and someone was telling me recently we had about 400 of those
Okay.
students here. Plus, we have 17,000 students overall. So I think the estimate I've heard is somewhere between 5 and 10% are
Okay.
still in Waco around.
Yeah. So you're trying to figure out how to serve students that might still be physically there, but not leaving their rooms, or you're still trying to figure out how to reach students wherever they are around the globe. I mean, you've got a lot on your mind right now. So I want to ask you, when it comes to academic support and basically just student support and care right now, what's been on your mind as you've kind of entered into this new season?
Sure. Yeah. So, what I wouldn't say I do a ton of the help with students right now. My job is to step back and help those who help the students. So I want to give a lot of credit to those folks everywhere. But as I started talking to my colleagues in student affairs and academic support services, they were just like, man, we're so busy, and that's an answer most of us give and get every day anyways. But as I tried to figure out what they were busy with, it was this kind of reactionary, like, this parent is calling about this student doesn't have food and yet they're sick. How do we get food to their room? This person needs their laptop shipped home. How are we going to do that? We don't have an accurate count of how many people live in the residence hall, so we couldn't account for who was there and who wasn't. Really important things, but I think back to Covey, and he talked about these 4 quadrants that based on urgency and importancy, and I feel like most of my colleagues were in what we call quadrant 1. They were dealing with things that are super important and things that were super urgent. And I realized, with my boss giving me permission to rethink how we serve, that maybe I could spend some time in what Covey calls quadrant 2, which is dealing with things that are going to be really important but are not urgent at this moment.
Yeah.
So, I spend usually 8 to 8:45 each morning reading all the higher ed news. I've taught classes and graduate programs for higher education. I just enjoy learning about it. So I thought maybe I could take some time and think about writing and talking to some folks about how we might rethink our work to be most helpful in these coming months.
Yeah. Yeah. What were some of the things that rose to the top for you when it came to academic support specifically? And you thought, hey, we're going to have, or maybe just what were some of the initial questions you thought we're going to need to figure out how to better support academically when we're not all right here?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, student affairs emerged basically, I don't want to do a big history story, but, in the late 19th century when faculty started doing a lot more with research. And it was basically an opportunity to help these students who had been previously, their character was being developed and invested in by the faculty much more. And now with this expectation to do research, they need someone to help out. So these deans of students were created. They started doing this, but it was all based around a residential on-campus model.
Yeah.
And so, when you have, 8% of your residence hall here, you can give those students a lot of attention, but you are equipped to provide attention to 300, 350 folks. When you organize intramurals for thousands of folks, and there's no intramurals going on, there's other things that you may have the capacity to help out in. And so, what I've just thought is what could we spend our time doing that would allow us to better serve these students instead of operating in our existing siloed operations? What could we do collectively to rethink how we do our work?
Yeah, that's good. So you and I have recently just exchanged some notes about our current state and things that we're trying to do to make sure we're thinking about students during this time. And one thing that we've discussed is that student affairs and academic support staff may need to take this time and get out of their comfort zone and try some new things. And we're all feeling this right now. And I look around the globe really, and see people experience this and pivoting in an amazing way. But I also spent 15 years in student affairs, and I know that get out of your comfort zone and try new things is sometimes easier said than done for some people. So what have you been telling people who are just nervous about changes right now with their work? How do they start to do this? What's a step somebody in academic support could start to take right now?
Sure. Yeah, I think, and hopefully this would resonate with you and others, is that's what our initial thought is. What do we tell people? And I think the better way to phrase that is, how do we connect with people? How do we listen to people? How do we understand people? I think about seek to understand first and then be understood. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So as someone who's had to learn and grow a lot in relationships over my life, I would think, initially we've got to share, how are you doing? How's your health? Most of the conversations we begin with, it's not like we jump straight down to business, particularly in this time. It's like, how are you doing? We need to address the immediacy of what's going on, right? Which you and I did when we first touched base today. Well, then, okay, now we've heard that and expressed that, and hopefully we're adapting to it. To me, and I teach courses in leadership, action comes from the heart. So telling someone what to do is very different than figuring out what they care about and how we can tap into that. One of the speakers that I share with my class, I think it's Daniel Pink, talks about the three things that motivate people are mastery, autonomy, and purpose. But I would basically, going back to purpose, what do you care about? And with most people in student affairs and academic support services, it's the students. So if we care about the students and we know that to best support them in this time, we're going to have to change, then we're going to do it, right? Like if you have children and you don't really want to change diapers or, baby proof your house where they might stick their finger in the electrical socket, you can not do that. But if you want to help your children survive, then you're going to have to figure out how to baby proof. You're going to have to figure out how to change diapers. And you do that. Why? Because you love your children more than anything. And the same way most people in our work love our students more than most things. And we want to change in the ways that best help them be successful.
Yeah. It's again, I'm just amazed at how people have the conversations I've had with personal just connections or clients that I have, how they pivot. I shared that story right before we started, how the pivot has happened so quickly. I'm just amazed. And I think it's a testament to good, courageous leadership at schools right now, and the wisdom that the Lord is imparting on us to help us navigate a situation none of us were even thinking about a month ago. So
I also think
go ahead.
that people in these areas have tended to change faster than maybe some other groups in higher ed, not because they're better at change, but because our focus is on the students, and the students are always 18 approximately years old when they come to college, and maybe older at some point. But if we don't adjust to the time of our 18-year-olds, then we're going to get left behind, where a faculty member might be able to teach off of their paper, or a budget, might be able to just stay the same, and you figure out how you're going to use it differently. If we treat 18-year-olds like we treated them 10 years ago, we're going to become irrelevant pretty fast. So I feel like the folks in these areas have typically been relatively quick to adapt.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And such a deep commitment at many of our, what would be typical at many of our CCCU type institutions, Christian schools, would be a deep commitment to mission. One of the things that I often talked about at Geneva when I worked there was that we try to operate with a caring pedagogy, right? That it comes from, you just said it, let me know how much you care first. And if we can start from that posture, so many other things open up. And for some that are worried about doing things differently, well, yeah, it's going to look different, but I still get to live out mission of caring for students.
Right.
So, and one of the ideas that I just want to talk about this briefly, because I love the idea. And I think this is one of those practical things that people might be looking for right now is, you and I talked a little bit about implementing a coaching model during a time like this when we're all separated and isolated. Well, the coaching model is like the bread and butter of much of student development work and has been from the very beginning, but now this looks totally different in operation.
Yeah.
So how can schools do this well right now, and maybe share what Baylor's been doing in recent, days?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, when I think about an analogy for that one, I think about, when we first began to have doctors, and doctors cared for sick people, right? And then there were emergencies or things that had to be cut out. So the profession of ER doctors or surgeons emerged. And then we realized we could help with the kidneys and the podiatrists and the ear, nose, and throat doctors. And so in some sense, that's what happened in university. Some people, I think, unfairly call it administrative glut. I would call it dealing with the complexity and the uniqueness of our students. So we've ended up with, these units outside of academic departments that sometimes 15 or 20 different departments that are meeting unique aspects of our students. But right now, in a shift, paradigm shift where all our students are moving online, I think we need to go back to the model of a doctor, basically, that has to figure out a lot of things. We have to understand our patients now differently, right? They're all online and they're interacting instead of the approximately 80 hours a week when they're not in class or sleeping, where they have to interact with our student affairs, academic support staff. Now they're interacting with the university potentially only 15 hours a week when they're in class. All the rest of that time, they're separated from their university. And so we need to step back and say, how do we help these students? And the coaching model is basically one way to do that. It becomes even more student-centric, and it puts us back in a position to understand our students before we splinter out again into a differentiated model.
Yeah. So what does that look like at Baylor over the last week or two?
Sure. Yeah. So basically, a student life division and the academic success center area came together, identified a couple champions and a leadership team, which I'm serving on, and said, let's figure out how to make this happen. And so we have started meeting as a full group every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then we have two subcommittees, one focused on students that I'm a part of, which has to do with this survey to all students, and another group focused on selecting the staff, training them, and figuring out how they're going to log information on reaching out to these students. So we're also trying to identify who we need to most importantly reach out to. So beyond the survey and the students who indicate they need and want help, we'll probably look at upcoming May graduates, if you deal with, if we're going through a grieving process, in terms of what we're all losing in the next few months, the seniors potentially, could be feeling like they've lost a lot more. Yeah. We're also thinking about the students who just came back from study abroad. Many students got pulled back from places they were. And so it's bad enough being here and dealing with this versus, you've been 3 months in another country and now you're back here and all the classes you were taking, where are they? So we've looked at our food insecure students and how do we best help them, and students that have technology challenges, and then obviously our new students who are still building their connection to the university. So those are some of the target groups. The other thing that we're doing, which I just thought of, is my boss is a data guru. So he's figured out a way to study the learning management system, which we call Canvas here. Some schools call it Moodle or Blackboard, and identify which students have not logged into that over the last week. And so we'll be able to say, hey, we've got 14,000 undergraduates, and these 1,000, they're taking all their classes online, but these 1,000 haven't even been in any of the modules for their classes. Like we might want to figure out what's going on with them. So that's another thing.
Yeah, that's really good ideas. And I think one of the things I continue to hear is, so many grieving processes, macro level, but then also May graduates or the seniors that aren't going to get to do their theater spring production, or all the student athletes who are not going to get to complete their career on campus. There's just a lot of in student development work and student support work, we think about all the complex factors that come together for any student in any given year. This is compounding that, and it's having people like you bring their game to the next level to say, how do we continue to support through all this? So, well, in these uncertain days, I'll end with this one. In these uncertain days and what we're experiencing, what's the one piece of advice you've been sharing with student affairs practitioners or those working with students that is offering a sense of solace right now?
Yeah. I've been reading a book lately, a couple of good books, but this one's called Factfulness. I don't have the cover jacket here. I'd show it to you. But the book is focused on, recognizing when we get negative news, we need to remember that information about bad events is much more likely to impact us than good events. And, in some ways you could say it's timely that I'm looking at this, but this guy goes in and talks about, he shows graphs, which I know you won't be able to read this, but, he has 32 things that have exponentially decreased over the last 20 to 30 years. Children dying, deaths in battle, leaded gasoline, smallpox, ozone going down, plane crash deaths. So over and over, all these things that have improved, but that humans are programmed, whatever the case may be, to remember and not forget the bad things that happen to us. And I don't want to throw that out. I mean, all of us have someone elderly or has some health challenge. If that's not us, it could be someone else. And some really bad things could happen to those folks and will continue to happen, unfortunately. But I also want us to take the lessons of what I'm learning here and think about the opportunities. Higher education and churches are what some experts have called the two longest lasting institutions in the United States.
Yep.
Like the oldest company in the United States is from the 1800s, but Harvard was started in 1636,
Yep.
Churches were one of the first things that started here. So these institutions have been around for almost 400 years. Yep. And they have weathered the storms, but they're very slow to change. They're very conservative organizations. And so what I would say is it's time to think about the opportunities. It's time to think about what we can do to become our students' champions. Faculty are having to do this. Most had to figure out how to get their courses online last week. Students had to figure out how to take their courses online, which is probably a little easier for them than faculty learning how to teach online, but it was still hard. And so the people that are the staff, student affairs, academic support people in particular, we have the capacity to think about how we adjust our work to learn something new, If you asked anyone, what would you want a college graduate to know? People would have a lot of answers, but almost everyone I know would say what they know when they graduate will never, if they stop learning there, it will never be enough for them the rest of their lives. They've got to learn to keep learning. Yeah. And we need to do that now. We need to figure out how we can change and adapt. I've got to learn how to do video chats and talk with you electronically because you and I can't be with each other. And so I would say let's rise up and let's take this opportunity to show how we are learners too.
Wow, that's such a good word, Jeff. Thank you. And I think you're right. And somebody once said, I can't remember, I was at a conference and they said, never lose the opportunity to take advantage of a good crisis. And none of us want to be in this situation, right? Yeah. And we're taking it very seriously and we're not making light of it at all. And that's one of the reasons we're trying to do things like this to help people in any sort of way we can as we come alongside of them. But also, how can we innovate through this? How can we adapt? How can we make things better? How can we think more intentionally about students flourishing now and what this will mean in the future for whatever we face. And in the midst of all of that, in the raging sea and malaise we find ourselves in, we get to rest in the promises of the scriptures and know that Christ still sits on the throne and he's ruling over all, and we trust in him and we continue to pray hard. So I'm praying for you, I'm praying for Baylor, I'm so thankful that you took this time to spend with me today. If people wanted to get a hold of you, they caught some in this that really tickled their ears, how can they get a hold of you?
Sure, they can feel free to email me or call me or work me. I'm happy to talk about things I'm passionate about. So my email would be jeff.doyle.923 email.com. And my phone number, if you just Googled my name, it would come up, but 254-640-791. I'll be happy to talk and help anyone I can and take feedback on what I've shared. If I've gotten something wrong, you think, and you'd like to educate me, I'd be happy to listen to you.
Great. Jeff, thank you so much, and blessings on your work the rest of this week.
Thanks, Brian.